So this redneck dude is somehow able to pull off one of the biggest money heists in American history. And he becomes rich as f***. Now the guy, his name's David. And he works at Loomis Fargo as a vault supervisor. And he handles massive amounts of money all day. But despite that, he doesn't get paid very much. But that's about to change. Because one day, David meets this woman at work. Her name's Kelly. And David thinks Kelly is fine. And they hit it off and they start flirting, and soon enough, they start smashing. Now, at some point during this period, David hears about an armored truck robbery that had happened a few months before, several states away. A Loomis Fargo employee had robbed Loomis for like millions of dollars. And at this point in the story, that robber hadn't been caught yet. I actually talked about that heist in a different video I did. Anyway, so David and Kelly, they hear about this heist. And they're like, well, that guy took millions of dollars and he didn't get caught. Maybe we could also rob Loomis Fargo and take millions of dollars and not get caught. What could possibly go wrong? Now, Kelly, she knows just the guy who could help them pull off this heist. Her friend back from high school, who's a bit shady. This guy. Chambers. So the three of them put their heads together and they start planning this big Loomis Fargo heist. And there are other people on the sidelines involved in this heist too, but for now, let's just focus on these three main characters. So a few months go by and they've got it all meticulously planned out. And then the big night finally rolls around. It's time to pull off the heist. And David, he's actually working that evening. And when his shift ends, he leaves with the other employees working. But he doesn't actually leave. Instead, he circles back and sneaks back into the building. Then he goes straight to the vault and starts taking money out of it and loading it into a Loomis van. And over an hour and a half later, he's done. And he's loaded about $17 million in cash into that van. Now, David knows there are security cameras all around this building. So before he leaves, he goes back to the manager's office and he steals 2 surveillance tapes that would have footage of him on them. Next, he drives the Loomis van full of 2,700 pounds of cash. He drives it over to a parking lot in another part of town where Chambers and Kelly are waiting in a different van. So then they transfer this money to the new van. And this new van is a rental van. But here's the thing about this rental van. It's a little small. So they're transferring all this money into the rental van, but not all of it'll fit. So they end up leaving $3.3 million behind in the Loomis van because it all won't fit in the rental van. Oh, but that's not the only thing they leave in that Loomis van, because David forgets those 2 surveillance videos that he had taken from the manager's office. And so from there, they all end up going their separate ways. Kelly ultimately ends up going back home. Chambers also ends up going back to his home. And David hops on a flight to head over to Cozumel in Mexico so he can lay low for a while. But unfortunately for him, when traveling internationally, you're actually limited to how much money you can bring with you. So poor David is only allowed to bring $50,000 with him. Meanwhile, David's wife, because I guess he's married and didn't tell his wife about any of this, his wife reports him missing. And once police find the Loomis van with the leftover $3.3 million in cash in it, they also find the security tapes he accidentally left behind. So now they have their first suspect, David. And since this is such a huge heist, the FBI is now involved. But even they have no clue where David is. And his face is broadcast all over the place as the FBI tries to find him. And while David is off in Mexico trying to lay low, Chambers, not so much. So Chambers and his wife, they take all this new money he just got and they start spending it. And in less than a month, they move out of their trailer home and into a 7,000 square foot gated community mansion, which they paid for in cash. They also buy TVs, a diamond ring, a Rolex, new cars. Chambers' wife even gets a nose job and a brand new set of tits. And at one point, Chambers' wife even goes into a bank with 200 grand in a briefcase. And she asks the bank teller, "Hey, what's the most I can deposit without you guys having to report me to the feds?" And then she says, "Don't worry, it's not drug money." So yeah, not surprising that people start noticing this behavior, and pretty quickly people report Chambers and his wife to the FBI. While Kelly, she's a bit more conservative with her spending. She buys herself a minivan, she buys her kids a bunch of toys, nothing nothing too big. But once the FBI learns rumors that she had previously been smashing with David, suddenly she becomes a suspect. So the FBI, they get together and they decide the best way to bring these guys down is to wiretap Chambers' phone calls. Because of the three of them, he's obviously the loose cannon. Meanwhile, during all this, David, he's still chilling in Mexico, and he's keeping a low profile. But he realizes this 50 grand that he brought with him, it isn't gonna last too long. So he ends up calling Chambers, and he's like, "Hey, can you send me some of my share of the money so that I don't run out?" And Chambers is like, "Sure, buddy." But sending David money is not what Chambers does. Instead of sending him money, he decides to hire a hitman. And he's gonna send that hitman to Mexico to unalive David. That way, Chambers gets to keep David's share of the money, and if David is unalived, he can never snitch on them. So at this point, I know you're probably thinking, Ray, how the hell did David get himself into this mess? How did an otherwise nice guy with a clean record suddenly wake up one day and decide that he's gonna steal millions of dollars from his own employer? Like, what makes someone snap like that? Well, think about it this way. He goes to work every day at Loomis, and he oversees the vault, which means he loads millions of dollars in and out of that vault. I mean, he is surrounded by money. Like, it's just staring at him in the face. Yet, in his personal life, he can barely pay his bills. He's working sometimes 70, 80 hours a week for $8.15 an hour. Imagine that. Imagine you're broke, struggling to get by, and you have to stare at stacks and stacks of cash all day. Like, how would you feel? So, after years of being in this situation, he started to resent his life, and he started to resent his marriage, until he started working with Kelly. And he really started crushing on her. Like, he's liked her forever. Like, they used to go to school together. And Kelly, she was really pushing him to do this heist with her. So, he does it, thinking it'll impress her. So basically, he did all this because he was broke and he was trying to clap cheeks. And because of that, there is now a hitman after him, trying to unalive him. But, luckily for him, when Chambers calls the hitman and tells him exactly where to find David, the FBI has his phones tapped, and they're listening in. And now, they know exactly where to find David. So the feds go straight to Mexico, and they catch David, and boom, they arrest him. Here's his mugshot. Then, the next day, they go and arrest Chambers. Here's his mugshot. Then they arrest Chambers' wife. Here's her mugshot. And of course, they arrest Kelly. Here's her mugshot. In fact, they arrest a bunch of people involved in this. In total, about 20 people were arrested in connection with this heist. But David gets sentenced to a little over 7 years in prison, and Chambers, he's sentenced to 11 years in prison, while his wife gets 7 years in prison, and Kelly gets 6 years in prison. And they all have to pay back the money they stole. But allegedly, to this day, $2 million of that heist money is still missing. Like, they never found it. So, I guess it's still out there.